The short answer to the question we were asked, where will our grandchildren live, is that their future looks pretty grim unless things change quite significantly. We've already heard some pretty sobering statistics from Wakefield. This is true all across the country, and particularly in the kind of economic hotspots where our economy relies on growth and where the jobs are being created. Those housing constraints are at their very worst. So I think you mentioned that affordability ratios are about it was about 5 times,
5 times
in Wakefield. Now that's bad enough, but in Oxford, we heard about Oxford, it's over 10 times. Okay? That means Oxford University, which is one of the drivers of the knowledge economy and the industries of the future, is in a real panic about its long-term strategic position in the world because it simply cannot house the people that it needs to work as postdoctoral students. For example, these are real economic problems as well as serious social problems. In the short term, what this means is that we're all going to end up private renting. And actually, this is not some doomsday scenario. This is how most of human history has been organised. This is what land markets, and I'll come on to talk about land markets in the slides, this is what land markets pretty much naturally do. Most of human history, a tiny number of people have owned all the land, and the rest of us have been forced to rent off them. If we don't do something, that is the future that we are slowly heading back towards. Throughout the whole of the 20th century, private renting declined from being virtually everybody to being well under 10% of the population. Okay? That was a historic change. It was the first time in the history of humanity that has happened. And in the last 10 years, it's gone into reverse for the first time. Private renting has now doubled, and it's set to increase dramatically. At Shelter, we see the very, very real problems of this every day. Despite the fact that private renting is still only about 1 in 5 households in the country, recently overtook social renting, it's responsible for 40% of the cases that we deal with in Shelter, people that are suffering from eviction, overcrowding, appalling conditions. It's by far the most expensive tenure, but it's also the worst. So a third of private rented sector homes, far more than any other tenure, don't meet the decent home standards. And this is the future that we are condemning our children to, and our grandchildren, unless we do something about it. What do we need to do? Well, as we already heard, we do need to build an awful lot more homes. We need to be building roughly double what we are currently managing in England. These are just some doom stats. I won't go through them all. My favourite one is the chicken stat that always seems to serve Shelter well whenever we put it out. That if house prices and food prices had risen in line with each other, i.e. if food prices had gone up as fast as houses, a chicken would cost you over £50 now. I have since been told that that's partly to do with the perverse effects of chicken price deflation as much as house price inflation. But there you go. This is my graph that pretty much sums up the entire story of our housing failure since the Second World War. It tells you, firstly, that we're not building anywhere near as many homes as we were in the economically ravaged post-war era. So when people tell you that the economic conditions mean we just can't build any homes, well, they seem to be managing a hell of a lot better when the country was literally bankrupt and broken. So it must be possible. Secondly, it tells you that this failure is not the fault of any one particular government or party, or even to do with the cycles of the economy. The bar across the top shows you political control. The bit underneath that shows economic booms and recessions. And what that basically shows you is there's no connection between housing supply, political control, or even the economic conditions. And finally, what it shows is there's also no connection with the red line, which is house prices. This is a market which is fundamentally failing. Supply simply does not meet demand. And I would ask you to compare this to any other market. You know, if the price of mobile phones was going through the roof, you get an awful lot more mobile phones produced and the price would come back down again. In fact, in most consumer markets, we expect quite naturally every year products to get better, more numerous and cheaper. Only in housing do we expect the product to get worse, more expensive and scarcer with every year that passes. Something is not just a bit wrong, it's fundamentally wrong. The other thing that this chart tells you is that one of the key missing pieces of the jigsaw is local authorities. And as we heard earlier, local authorities used to build a massive amount of housing in this country, and ever since the 80s they've been just removed from the picture. And the other sectors, the little yellow bit in the middle is housing associations, and the private sector just have not made up the lost ground, and looks like they frankly never will unless things change dramatically. So we need, the other thing to note about this is that there was no crowding out. When local authorities were building a lot of homes, that didn't mean the private sector couldn't. Actually, quite the opposite. This is not a situation where one sector cannibalises the other. Quite the opposite. They actually support each other. It's called a balanced mixed economy. It has served us well for many decades. Putting all our eggs in one basket has not. So this is a closer look at the private market. And in deference to Philip, who said nice things about me, I should stress that this is not having a go at the house builders per se. They are victims of the system as much as actors within it. But what this shows is private output since the Second World War. There have been 3 significant periods when private house building has increased dramatically. And yeah, we can do it, we can see an uplift, but what it shows you is firstly that each peak is lower than the one before, each one is shorter than the one before, and house prices have had to go through the roof to support each one of those. We are slowly building ourselves into the ground and relying on ever higher house prices to get a tiny private sector supply reaction. That's us right down there. Yeah. As soon as the market turned in 2007, private supply fell off a cliff, and it is only now ever so slowly beginning to inch up. With each turn of this boom-bust cycle, we ratchet down total production. Something is fundamentally wrong here. And this is what it is. It's the land market. And yes, green belts are a part of that, but not only. The planning system is a key intervention in the land market, but I do want to, in general, I don't want to get into massive debate about the nature of planning reform. I think it's just worth saying that we don't have a dysfunctional land market because of the planning system. It's actually the other way around. We have a planning system because land markets are inherently dysfunctional. They do not work for the benefit of society. They naturally concentrate wealth in the hands of those that happen to own land. And that has always been the way, and I suspect always will be. That's why we have a planning system, is precisely to intervene in it and regulate the supply of land. Now we can argue about whether it's doing that properly, and I would agree that there are issues, particularly around the green belts, that we should look at. But whatever we do with planning, these problems, the problem of the fundamental dysfunction of the land market, will remain. What this tries to demonstrate, slightly confusing picture, is that effectively house building is an intersection of 3 different markets, all of which centre on land prices. What it means, in effect, is that with every turn of the market, land prices tend to go up. As house prices go up, land prices rocket far, far faster. Land prices are even more volatile than house prices. This makes the building industry and the building market an extremely risky game. It makes developers extremely nervous because they have to outlay a huge amount of capital to buy land, and then they're at serious risk of losing everything. This makes them inevitably risk averse. It makes them cautious about trying new products. Why do you think we basically haven't changed the model of the technology of house building for 40 years? Because there's no real incentive to change, and the risks of change are very high. It also makes them extremely vulnerable to any downturn, so we get this terrible cyclicality. Finally, it means that it is all deeply connected to the actual second-hand market in homes. None of us are off the hook on this. This is not just about corporations acting in the market, it's about ordinary homeowners. If we want house prices to stay up, and unfortunately an awful lot of people in this country do seem to want house prices to stay up, then we have to accept that that makes development extremely expensive, because land prices are directly related to house prices. This is my attempt to summarise the way that the development process works, and at this point Philip may start throwing things at me, but anyway. In essence, you have a 3-stage process where a developer has to go out and buy land speculatively. They never really know if it's going to get planning permission, if those homes are going to be popular, how much they're going to be able to sell them for. So it's a bit of a punt, and they have to lay out a lot of money for it, so it's a risky punt as well. The problem is they're in competition with other developers. The one who secures the site will be the one that offers the landowner the most. That stands to reason. How do you offer the landowner more? Well, you make more aggressive assumptions about the price you can sell the homes for. You squeeze the build costs. You try and squeeze the local authority down on affordable housing contributions. In other words, you try and produce as worse a scheme as possible in order to maximise the return to the landowner. This means, and again, this isn't the developer's fault. That's the effect of competition. Is that intense competition in the land market means we almost by definition build too few homes and worse homes, and the worst schemes are the ones that tend to get built. Move on to the construction phase, and actually here there's very little competition because the sheer cost and risk of the first land market phase has driven out small and medium-sized enterprises, and I agree entirely with Paul about the detrimental loss of that medium-sized and regional building sector that was the mainstay of the UK housing system when we were building rather more homes and rather better homes. There's very little competition at that stage. And then we finally get to the final sales stage where effectively we're all in it and we're feeding the system through our house buying choices. There is an awful lot of public sector intervention, which is the green bit at the top. Unfortunately, it's all at the wrong end. It's all down at this end of the process. So we intervene through the planning system, we intervene through building regulations. We intervene in the housing market with housing benefit, with more support for mortgage interest. Now with a whole plethora of help to buy and rent to help to what's it schemes, millions of them, all of which are effectively just stoking a dysfunctional system because they're not doing anything about the fundamental problem at the beginning of the process. So, with KPMG, and thank you Philip for the plug, we've been working on this problem for some time, and we've come up with a detailed programme for how to change this over the course of the next Parliament. And it is difficult to do. There's no easy answers, but the ultimate vision is to simply reverse the order of priority here. We need to get away from intense competition in the land market and make competition do what it does best, drive better consumer prices and better consumer products, as developers, as producers should be competing with each other for market share and for customers by trying to sell them something better, rather than competing with each other to secure scarce resource in land. That means we need to intervene far more in the land market than we currently do. Unfortunately, there is no one magic bullet on this, and I agree entirely with Philip that it is not urban extensions or urban densification or garden cities. It is all of those things and everything else. The scale of the shortage is so great, we need all of them. So I'm afraid I won't be voting for any one of those three things unless you give me 3 cards. What we do need is integrated action across 4 key areas, and there are actually no less than 16 recommendations in our programme, which I won't go into in any great detail. Firstly, we need to intervene in the land market. We need the public sector to make sure that enough land comes forward, critically at reasonable prices. It's not just a matter of removing planning restriction so that developers can have an easier ride, although I'm sure that will make their lives better. It won't actually fix the fundamental problems, and it won't get us to where we need to in terms of not just the number of homes, but the quality and the value, the affordability of them. Secondly, we need a much more diverse and robust house building industry so that there are lots of different players operating on different models, so they're less vulnerable to the cyclical downturns when they all shut up shop at the same time. That means we need more small and medium-sized enterprises, we need councils to get back into the game, we need housing associations doing their bit. I saw, I think Paul Chatterton spoke at the previous event in this series. Yeah, we need more community-based housing schemes coming forward, and that, I speak with some experience, is an extremely difficult thing to do. But we need housing supply from all different sources, and a variety of different business models. Thirdly, and this is the difficult bit for any politicians, we do need to spend some money on it. While I think we can actually change this mainly through structural reform to the land market, you're never going to do that overnight. It will take time, and especially in the short term, politicians need to see results. If I'm going to persuade politicians to take the risks inherent in tackling some vested interest in the land market, they're going to need to see results quickly, and that means within 5 years. That means they're also going to have to spend some money in order to get some proper affordable housing built reasonably fast. And in our proposals, we call for a modest, slight doubling of the affordable house building budget. Right? It is very modest. House building took an enormous cut in the 2010 emergency budget. Finally, and has been mentioned before, we need that strategic leadership at the right level. We have a terrible governance problem in this country where planning, infrastructure, investment and actual delivery are all done at different levels. They need to be integrated sensibly at the right level, and I would suggest that actually city regions, cities are the right level at which that sort of coordination needs to happen. Finally, I was asked to talk about garden cities. This was our proposal for a new garden city in Medway, the Hoo Peninsula in the southeast. This is, as I say, not a magic bullet. There is no magic bullet. We need all of these things. But it was an interesting exercise to test out some of these proposals on a kind of real live site. And what we found is actually, if you intervene, you get the land in at a reasonable price. And here, because of the strictures of the Walton Prize that said no public money could be spent on it, and without the force of government kind of just compulsory purchasing the land, as was done for the new towns, we needed to persuade the landowners, so we offered them a mere 10 times existing use value. And if you only offer them 10 times existing use value, they will laugh at you, by the way, because that is just no way what they would expect to get. But still, I think 1,000% sounds reasonable. If you can get them to accept 1,000%, then we could build a sustainable, attractive place with 37.5% affordable housing, with all the infrastructure you need to make it work. This can be done. And because of time, I will skip that one. If we're going to get to that magic number of 250,000 homes a year, which, by the way, is what we need just to keep up with current demand, let alone actually deal with some of the backlog and look to the future, because a lot of our house stock is getting very old. If you add all of these different interventions up, we reckon you can do it. I would have just drawn some pretty pictures on lines on a graph and said, look, it works. KPMG, who are apparently much more rigorous about these things, insisted that we go through every single one of our proposals and quantify them exactly and remove any double counting and everything. And they assure me that this is now a reasonable prediction for if the next government does everything we say in this document, then I can guarantee they will definitely be building 250,000 homes, and we will solve the problem. Thank you.